we all learn. What's going to reinforce this defined behavior? Think about how we might set the learner up for success. We can create a participant who is joyful and performs at high levels. A simple way to begin achieving the outcomes we want to see is to start viewing behavior as information. The things we're going to be talking about today don't just apply to dogs.
Welcome everyone. My name is Kim Larson. I'm here with Luminoso.
My name is Brie Blakeman. I am founder of Noble Wolf Dog Training. Noble Wolf has been in business since 2018. We do everything from behavior modification to puppy training, in-home private lessons, day training, group classes, and more. Learning is the process of acquiring new understanding, knowledge, behavior, skills, values, attitudes, preferences, and humans, animals, and some machines, we all learn. And learning is universal across species. The things we're going to be talking about today don't just apply to dogs. Crow Nova, who was perched outside of my house because she has learned that when she perches on my trash cans, she may or may not get a scatter of dog kibble. This is a really important starting point, understanding that we all simply do what works. Learning theory, being universal across all species, describes how the learner receives, processes, and retains knowledge during learning. So cognitive, emotional, and environmental influences, as well as prior experience, all play a part in how understanding or a worldview is acquired or changed and knowledge and skills retained. You'll hear me talk a lot about consequences, and that tends to have a negative connotation. When I use the word consequences, I'm describing something that is an either undesirable or desirable outcome, and all consequences drive behaviors. A simple way to begin achieving the outcomes we want to see is to start viewing behavior as information. What is the learner, dog, or employee's behavior telling us about what is or is not working for them? Behavior is an output of a variety of factors. It happens to satisfy a need or gain access to a resource or outcomes. Dr. Susan Friedman says behavior never occurs in a vacuum. And by looking at the learner or employee as a whole, meeting their basic needs and taking time to understand what their behavior is telling us, we can create a participant who is joyful and performs at high levels. So through a holistic, multifaceted approach, looking at behavior as a product of health, environment, physiological states, such as stress and more, all participants will be more likely to enjoy the process while strengthening relationships, education, and performance along the way.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes up a lot in research, because if we're looking for creativity, if we're looking for optimized, innate, like human-centered behaviors, we need to meet a lot of our like organism and psychological needs first before we can start being creative, being open, and innovating the way that we want people to as consumers and as employees and as a society.
Yeah, so Max has a lot of instinctive core needs. All dogs have some variety of the 6 core needs that you see listed there. So sniffing, dissecting, digging, chewing, chasing, social contact, either with their own kind or with humans. These are core needs that we can't remove from a dog. They are part of what makes a dog a dog. And Max, being a Chihuahua and particularly a Terrier mix, is bred to go from 0 to 60 without asking the human, how do you feel about this? We did not breed Terrier dogs to orient towards us and collaborate with us towards a common goal. We bred them to just go get rid of vermin, right? So Max has a lot of core needs that maybe don't fit really nicely in modern human
In the
society.
city, the city's
Yeah,
hard.
in the city. And so a lot of people would call the behaviors Max exhibits problem behaviors, such as being overreactive to his environment, but they're not really problem behaviors. And we can actually help reduce the misplacement of those behaviors by targeting, understanding, and providing outlets for his core needs. So, understanding a dog's or employee's core needs is a crucial aspect in achieving the outcomes and behaviors we want. Every dog has an emotional cup, every human does as well, that is relatively empty at the start of the day and needs to be filled through satisfying instinctive core needs. And we can do that in a way that works for our homes, our goals, our society at large. Behavior is how animals act on their environment to influence outcomes. So in dog training, we might refer to the environment and how it impacts behavior as an antecedent or an antecedent arrangement. And when we think about achieving a goal or rerouting an unwanted behavior, I think it's important to point out that as humans, we're really, really good at noticing things we don't like. We're kind of oriented towards the negative. And so we tend to fixate on problems instead of noticing and giving attention to the behaviors we like. And ultimately, the first step to building desirable behaviors and outcomes is to notice how the environment might be promoting and reinforcing unwanted behaviors. So, a simple way to begin building the behaviors or outcomes you want to see is to start viewing behavior as information as opposed to a personal attack. And think about how we might set the learner up for success so that they are more likely to rehearse the things that we want to see. And that's ultimately the first step. So knowing that environment influences behavior and that we can alter the environment to promote the behaviors we want to see is an important first step.
Yeah, and that ties into researchers really closely because we're often trying to solicit information from respondents who, like, it may be very personal, it may be very intimate, it may be something that people don't care about. How do we set up the environment? How do we give people those rewards throughout the process to continue through the survey? For example, is the survey fun or is it boring? And am I going to leave? Like that behavior is um, when we're soliciting that information, we're setting the environment that people can choose to respond to or not. There's some surveys that are awful, and it's like I look at it and it's tough, it's not enjoyable, and I'm not obligated to be there. So survey exit. And there's other ones that are really interesting, and people will share really long stories about advice to new people or memories that they've experienced. There's a lot of things that we can do to control the environment even in unexpected ways. It's not necessarily always, do we have a nice office? Sometimes it can be even more granular than that. So we want to make sure that we're broadening our understanding of like what is environment and really reflect on how much control do we have.
So another Dr. Susan Friedman quote, what is the function? So what is the function of the unwanted behavior? So because we tend to focus on problems, try and frame it less as a problem, more as information, and ask yourself what is reinforcing the behavior. Because if a behavior is occurring, it's getting reinforced somewhere by law. So again, a behavior always happens for a valid reason. So what is driving the behavior or outcome? We tend to fixate on the problem instead of noticing and giving attention to what is already working as well. So, training ourselves to see, notice, and reinforce desirable behaviors, which your dog, your employee, I don't know, maybe AI too, that's Kim, the field, um, is already doing. So, start to shift your perspective and notice the good, notice what's working so that that actually increases. And the more you do that, the faster you're going to achieve the desirable outcome, and you're just simply going to do it with higher performance and less time.
knowing the tools you're working with is the parallel there. Like Luminoso Daylight, the AI learns what words mean based on how those words are used. And so if you're not seeing the clear definitions or the conceptual matches are kind of like odd, we want to go back to how we're asking the question so that people are responding in a way that the AI can actually learn what is a Fessenden, what is a Lombard. Those are very Portland specific examples, but based on how they're being used in the data, the AI can figure out like, oh, that's a street. And this other thing that has a very unique name is a restaurant. And it's clustering those things together because of how it's being used in the stories being told.
Which makes me think, Kim, like that speaks a lot to context. And when we think about what is the function of behavior, we have to look at the context that the behavior is occurring too. So, for example, with
Mhm.
dogs, a lot of people don't like when dogs jump up on someone. Jumping could be happening for a wide variety of reasons. It could be happening because the dog simply wants to lick your muzzle, right? Because that's an affiliative dog behavior. So they're seeking attention, affection, trying to say, I come in peace. Jumping might also happen to ask for help. A young
Mhm.
puppy might jump because they're trying not to pee inside and they're getting your attention because they want
Yeah.
you to take them outside. So it could be care seeking. So ultimately, looking at what is the function, but also within the context that the behavior is happening is very important. A lot of what we're talking about stems from applied behavior analysis, and that is at the core of modern dog training. So ABA is a scientific technique concerned with applying empirical approaches based upon the principles of respondent and operant conditioning to change behavior of social significance. And the principles of this science define reinforcement as anything that increases a behavior and punishment as anything that decreases a behavior, and consequence as the end result of the behavior, which can be, again, as I said before, either desirable or undesirable. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that down the line.
Emmy, at a year and a half year old, is still a jumper, a very enthusiastic, wants to be walk on two legs, very eager to jump. So one of the things that we've done to kind of prevent that practiced behavior is appropriate signage, right? She can do her skills, she can do her tasks, she's really good at her job, but she's still at a stage where she is vulnerable to being way overexcited and wanting to make friends with everyone. I love that she loves everyone, but it's not necessarily appropriate when she's working and on duty. So we have this sign of give space. And with that communication kind of broadcasted to the people around us, that's been very helpful.
I mean, what I love about this example is that management, and when I say management, I'm speaking to environmental management. This particular example not only sets Emmy up for success, it also sets up everybody else in the environment for success, right? So it's giving people information to give space, which allows them to be successful, not messing up her training. And it sets her up for success at the same time. So when we rearrange the environment, it really is for the benefit of the whole so that we're meeting in the middle and finding a path and kind of a roadmap that works towards multiple goals at the same time. And we do that through prevention with dogs, active supervision, rewarding the desirable, teaching alternatives. So, what do you want the learner to do instead of the problem? And then simply being consistent in our definition of that behavior and how it's reinforced.
The things that I get to use with Emmy are very different than what I got to raise Max with 10 years ago, right? There weren't biothane leashes that were, good for rainy weather. The crate situation has improved. The dog enrichment situation has improved. We struggle with like grooming and nail filing. And Bree's like, well, have you tried a scratch board where you train the dog to use that digging behavior directed towards a cooperative care environment? There's a lot of resources out there.
A lot of the dog products that are out there, again, kind of tie back into this concept of instead of focusing on controlling misbehavior, we're focusing on setting the learner up to succeed from the start. So the green, orange, and blue topples is what they're called. These are ways you can teach a dog to be alone without stress. You can give a puppy something to do with their mouth so they're not practicing biting on you. And they are self-soothing mechanisms. So licking, chewing, these are self-soothing activities for dogs. So you're helping a dog learn how to self-regulate, and you're achieving all of those things with one product that can make all the difference in preventing the rehearsal of unwanted behaviors, and while doing so, teaching your dog what you want them to do instead. So focusing again on getting creative about how you can provide outlets for the behaviors that need maybe a little bit of rerouting. There's a lot out there that can help with that in the dog world, and I'm sure in AI as well. When we're trying to come up with a training plan that achieves a goal or multiple goals, the first thing that we want to do is really define the behavior that we want the learner, in this case Emmy, to do. So the target behavior, what does the behavior look like? It has to be clear, it has to be definable. So thinking about describing the behavior without saying, I want the dog to stop being X, or I want the dog to stop barking. That's not a behavior. That's just something that's describing an outcome that might be the result of training something else. So when we're defining a behavior, we want to describe it without using labels, without using labels such as being stubborn or lazy or unteachable. Those are human constructs that aren't really going to help us figure out exactly what we want to teach and how we're going to get there. So defining for Emmy, what are all the jobs that she needs to be fluent in order to fly across the country and hang out with you in a conference room? That's a lot of goals. And so in order to get there, we really needed to start with splitting out those individual behaviors and then splitting those behaviors down into smaller, more achievable steps. So we can do this with humans as well, with employees. If you have a big goal, you can't start with this giant goal. You have to start with one small building block that you can build upon and build upon until you have a staircase that takes you where you want to go. So the only way we can do that is with clearly defining what we want that behavior to look like. And then once we get there, we have to identify what's going to reinforce this defined behavior. There might be natural reinforcers, such as the opportunity, if your dog gives you eye contact and you release them to go sniff a bush, that's a natural reinforcer, something that's already occurring in the environment. But we can also use what we call contrived reinforcers, such as treats. So sometimes we need to start with the contrived reinforcers, teaching the dog to give us eye contact for food or lay down at our feet for food in order to onboard the new skill. And then we work towards integrating those natural reinforcers so that the behavior maintains for duration over time.
Folks on social media, we are being conditioned in this way when we check, and there's a notification app of like, oh, we got a new follower, a new subscriber, a new registrant. There's a lot of things that platforms do to reinforce that behavior. Well-designed surveys will offer that kind of reinforcement of like, sometimes people just really want to see, like, did I get the answers right? Being able to fill that curiosity need, it gives that serotonin dopamine throughout the process that is kind of similar to like you're getting reinforced throughout the process for aligning with the goals of the platform or of the company or of the organization or whatever it is.
We're going to just briefly talk a little bit about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is also referred to more commonly now as respondent conditioning. And this was popularized or studied by Ivan Pavlov. So we've all heard of the dog that drools at the sound of a bell, right? And that is what we call a conditioned emotional response, right? On this. Um, so we start with an unconditioned stimulus. So something that elicits a response without any learning. In this case, we have a Shiba Inu looking at a bowl of food and drooling, right? But even you, if you imagine like sucking on a lemon, you might feel a little drool start to build up in your mouth. We didn't have to teach you how to drool, right? It's just the thought of that or the presentation of that stimulus just causes that physiological involuntary behavior or that response. But then we have the whistle, and this is a neutral stimulus. And Ivan, in the Ivan Pavlov story, it would be a bell. And this has no, in this, if it's really a neutral stimulus, it has no learned negative or positive association initially. But when we present the neutral stimulus, the whistle, and immediately follow it with the unconditioned stimulus, the food, the neutral stimulus becomes conditioned. So the dog now drools at the sound of the whistle. And why is this important? Because if we want to teach our learner to do a certain behavior, if we go back to that hierarchy of needs, we also have to take into consideration the internal emotional associations at play. So in the case of Max, we can't start by just teaching him to do a different behavior than barking. If barking is happening because he has a negative, fear based, trauma based association with seeing another dog, we would
Yep.
want to first start by kind of rerouting those neural pathways and saying, hey, when you see a dog, you get a cookie and good things happen. So we can start to neutralize and shift that strong negative association to a positive. So classical conditioning kind of acts as a doorway into operant conditioning.
The business parallel to this in the negative sense or in relationship senses, it's like, we need to talk. And then people's stomach drops. Like, oh no. Or there's that like all hands meeting, no context happening in 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We have over time built the association to know what that means. It doesn't even need to be said out loud because there's not a counter conditioning process happening, right? That would feel extremely volatile. But it's the thing to recognize. It's not just the Pavlov bell and kibble. It's we have it in our day-to-day lives as well. Operant conditioning. Why does Max have a shoe?
Yeah. So operant conditioning, unlike the respondent conditioning that's involuntary, operant conditioning is voluntary. So I perform X behavior to achieve X outcome. So in this case, Max has learned that when he brings you a shoe, he gets a treat, right? So he might one evening bring you how many shoes? 6 shoes?
Yeah,
It's
he's
for
learned he's learned that if he brings me anything, that is a treat token because I'm either going to throw it again and pay him for it, or I'm going to say thank you, put it away, and he has to go find something else to bring me. He brought me 6 shoes when I was sitting there that evening, and one of them was about the same size as him. He brought me my rain boots, which is quite impressive.
That's pretty impressive. So, again, going back to the concept of reinforcement and punishment, reinforcement introduced after a behavior, it's reinforcement if it increases the behavior. It's punishment if it decreases the behavior. So, in the image, the mouse touches the lever and receives a shock. The lever touching behavior decreases. So it's not that punishment doesn't change behavior. It's just that it's not an effective means for long-term behavior change, and it doesn't teach the learner what you want them to do. So it's actually generally an unclear form of behavior change, an unclear path, I should say. So if we again focus on what we want the learner to do instead, then we can easily increase and reward those behaviors.
Sometimes maladaptive is a term that we'll use to describe like, oh, okay, I've learned that if I do this, something bad happens. Like if I reach out too aggressively, that customer will churn. Or if I like do the sales conversation, like that feels dangerous, but it doesn't build up the way to cause the good things to happen. It's much trickier. So
Yeah.
there are parallels on
And a
this one
really
too.
good human example of like a argument against punishment as a teaching methodology is getting a speeding ticket. So if
Mm.
you are driving and you get a speeding ticket on this certain corner, or maybe there's one of those cameras that gets you, but the camera's not always there. For a period of time after you get that speeding ticket, you're going to drive slower, but only for a short period of time. And you're more likely to only drive slower when the punisher is present, so i.e. a cop car. So you're not actually getting true behavior change, you're getting contextual behavior change that only occurs if punishment has recently been delivered. And that creates a very tricky, which would be a whole other webinar, relationship between behavior and consequences that gets kind of muddy. If you focus on your employees, the behaviors that they're doing well and reinforce those, you're going to have a lot more motivation to perform at higher levels. I like this just kind of as an example for employers as well of like how do you create a roadmap of systems to address things that need changing in the company, because that is inherently always part of having a company is figuring out effective ways to shift outcomes, and having a hierarchy of like least intrusive ways of achieving those outcomes is a really smart idea. So in behavior, again, we focus first on health, nutrition, and physical setting, which we've already discussed. Then we work towards our antecedent arrangements. So how do we set the learner up to succeed by shifting the environment? We reward the desirable behaviors. Differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors is basically teaching the learner what you want them to do instead. We call it a replacement behavior. So if you don't want your dog barking when someone rings the doorbell, teach them that the doorbell is a cue to go lay on their bed, right? And then at the top there, last resort teaching methodologies, if we touch them at all, are extinction, negative reinforcement, negative punishment, and positive punishment. And there are times in which we might reach for these, but we're going to make sure we exhaust all other efforts first of really like teasing out what does the learner actually need, what's the function of the behavior, what can I do as the bigger brain species in regards to dogs to set this dog up to succeed, to learn what I want them to learn with as few errors as possible.
In the researcher capacity, we may have really long cycles, perhaps like reading through the surveys one by one. I'm currently in the process of doing a local survey, and every single response I'm going through and I'm reading them, and I finally really get why that is so appealing to researchers to like want to read. Like, why would I need an AI to classify or to read it? I'm reading it already. But it's part of that arrangements category where with the tool I am still reading it because I find that reinforcing. I love seeing every response come in from my neighborhood, but I still benefit from having that unbiased view to see like, well, what are people actually saying avoid? What are people actually saying people do? What are people actually suggesting at a higher level in addition to? So setting up your researchers to have a text analytics platform where they can do both, like be rewarded at the individual level, but also be able to be scalable, be scientific with their qualitative research. It'll go a long way in boosting the integrity of the insights.
This is my husky Yuka. Huskies were literally bred to run away from us, guys. So teaching this dog to be off leash and to actually orient towards me and ask, is this working, is really hard. So only the learner gets to choose what's reinforcing. And when Yuka was a young pup, I could wave bacon in front of her face and she wouldn't care. I had to work hard to use natural reinforcers. So teaching her to recall to me so she could go chase that squirrel, for example. So I had to work with what ultimately was actually reinforcing for her, even though it was inconvenient for me and took a lot more effort, front loading of effort on my behalf, but it worked. So again, thinking about what is actually reinforcing for your dog. The pyramid is something we created at Noble Wolf that shows a general, like least rewarding to most rewarding for most dogs. But notice at the top of the pyramid is novelty. So understanding that novelty for most dogs is going to be the most reinforcing thing. And things that they experience every day, like standard daily food, kibble, or something like that, is going to be the least rewarding or reinforcing. But if you look at the boogie pay scale graphic at the bottom, it says disclaimer, all prices are subject to change. So what that means is what is reinforcing in one environment or context is not necessarily going to be reinforcing in a different one. And we want to match our reinforcer with the difficulty of the task at hand. So that could be the stress of the environment. The more stressful, the more overstimulating, the higher the pay scale needs to be. But what is high, what is a good paycheck is really dependent on the individual. So always ask your learner, your employee, your dog, what is an appropriate paycheck for this task?
There's been a lot of unionization going on. And one of the things that has come up on multiple occasions has been like pizza parties don't cut it for our job. Yes, we want to feel appreciated, but pizza is not the way anymore. And perhaps it never was. So, one of the things that we want to recommend and encourage folks to do is to engage with the employees, not just at a like pacifying level, but ask like, what are your personal challenges? What are the issues going on and how are you solving those currently? Because sometimes the needs are so severe that people are finding ways to meet those needs alternatively. In the employer space, like I have a second job driving Lyft, or I am working over the holidays at a retail store during Christmas break. There's a lot of things people are doing to meet their own needs. Just because those needs are being met doesn't mean we can't absolve some of that and alleviate some of that pain to have people refocus on the things that we want them to be doing, right? We want them to be collaborating and like innovating and figuring out what they can do better.
When Kim and I were meeting and talking about this, Kim used the example of throwing nurses pizza parties instead of giving them a raise. And my partner is a nurse. And after our talk, she told me that in her bathroom at her job, there is a letter written from a nurse that took her own life. And the letter is titled A Letter to My Abuser. And the abuser being the medical system, and how it spoke to how nurses are very, very much taken advantage of, overworked, and that what they get in return is a pizza party. Um, and so it was just interesting to have that come up and then have a immediate turnaround real life example of just how damaging it can be to not ask your employee what they need and to not actually work to deliver changes that make a difference. I think it's a heavy example, but it's a real example. And I think it's important to bring that home as well.
I do want to emphasize the gravity of the importance of asking. Breath. Summary. We're going to go back to the ABCs of learning.
If a behavior is continuing, it is getting reinforced. If a behavior is decreasing, it is getting punished. And making sure that you're aware of how the environment affects the behavior and those consequences is really important. Thinking about it in a multifaceted and holistic way. So it's not as simple as give a piece of pizza for behavior. It's also not as simple as give your employee dollars for their hard work. They need to feel valued, and they need to feel like an important stakeholder, essentially, of the company as well.
Doing what we can to set up our environment for success. If we want high quality research, we use high quality research methodology and tools. We define the behavior. We want to describe what is occurring and be specific about what the alternative is. And consequences aren't always bad. The connotation there has been co-opted by punishers, but it doesn't have to be the case. We can mitigate the undesirable behavior with controls and boundaries, and then we want to make sure we're rewarding the desired behavior. To aligning reality with goals, make sure we define what we want, state the hypothesis, and that we are setting up the environment for people who are responding to that to give that feedback. If it doesn't feel safe, then they're not going to give that feedback. If they don't feel that they're getting rewarded for participating, if it's not going to make a difference, why waste anyone's time? If you're not going to do anything about it, why do I need to tell you if you're not going to listen? All these things. Subscribe to Luminoso's YouTube channel for more research content, more stuff on text analysis, interviews, focus groups, all that good stuff. And check out Noble Wolf on Instagram and the Noble Wolf website.